Hey everyone, welcome to or back to the channel. My name is Hunter Hauk, and this here is my European Legless Lizard. This video is episode 2 of Species Spotlights, where we dive into some super cool reptiles and amphibians and learn what it's like to keep them as pets. Today we're going to be talking about the European Legless Lizard. Let's get into it. European Legless Lizards have been my dream reptile since before I started keeping reptiles. This summer, after the snake discovery enclosure build-off, I had the opportunity to hold a European Legless Lizard there, and that just solidified in my mind the fact that I needed a European Legless Lizard in my life. A few months later, someone reached out to Crimson Exotics, which is the reptile rescue that I fostered for and co-founded, needing to rehome a number of reptiles and amphibians, and one of them was Cypress here. I immediately got to work preparing for her arrival, and I have had her ever since. Now that I have a European Legless Lizard in my life, my perspective on them has changed quite a lot, and I think that's definitely going to help me teach you about them in today's video. Before we get into them, now that we've filmed this intro, I'm going to go put Cypress back because, as you can see, she doesn't love being handled, but we'll talk about that more here in a minute. European Legless Lizards are very unique pets, but before we talk about that, let's learn about them as a species. The European Legless Lizard has many names. You'll hear the European Legless Lizard called the sheltopusiks, spelled one of two ways, the giant glass lizard, the European glass lizard, or the Pallas's glass lizard. The last one comes from the Prussian zoologist Peter Simon Pallas, who I believe originally discovered them in 1775. Most importantly, their scientific name is Pseudopus apodus. For simplicity's sake, and so that I don't have to say European Legless Lizard 1,000 times in this video, I'm just going to be referring to them as Legless Lizards, but please note that I'm only referring to Pseudopus apodus and not the other species of Legless Lizards. Now, because I know someone is going to ask in the comments, what makes this a lizard and not a snake? Well, they have all of the synapomorphies of lizards and not snakes. Now, this is simplifying it, and I could talk about this for an hour and still not cover it all, but all snakes are lizards, but not all lizards are snakes. You see, snakes can't close their eyes, they don't have external ear openings, and they have much more kinetic jaws than lizards because of the quadrate bone, and they are in the suborder Serpentes, whereas lizards are in the suborder Lacertilia, I believe. Okay, moving on. These lizards are native to a large portion of Europe and Central Asia. It's such a wide range that instead of listing all of these countries, I think that just looking at this map will do a better job of helping you understand. Yeah, that is quite the wide range. As you can also see from the map, they tend to be observed more frequently in coastal regions. In the wild, you're likely to find them in forests, shrublands, and grasslands because, of course, look at their color, and then think about where they're most likely to blend in. Unfortunately, we don't know much about European Legless Lizards in the wild. The research that we do have is somewhat old and outdated, and there's not a ton of new research being done. If you have any new studies that you know about, definitely email them to me because I would love to learn more. I think that pretty much covers them briefly as a species, so now let's dive into the reason why you're probably here: pet keeping. First, there's one very important issue that I want to talk about with keeping these animals, and it's an ethical one. This is actually the reason why I waited to find a European Legless Lizard for adoption or rehoming, rather than purchasing one from a seller. This is the fact that all European Legless Lizards which are publicly available for sale are wild caught and imported. There are a very small number of zoological facilities and an even smaller number of private individuals who have figured out how to captive breed the Legless Lizard, and none of the offspring are publicly available for sale. They're going to other zoos or other of the private breeders' close friends so that they can help keep their numbers growing in captivity, of course. For this reason, if you're considering getting a European Legless Lizard, I would ask that you wait as long as you can until you find one for adoption or rehoming instead of supporting them being collected in the wild and imported into wherever you are. The IUCN most recently assessed their population in 2016 and found that they are relatively stable. Let's do our part to keep it that way. Let's say you get lucky like myself or my friend Zoe from ZA Reptiles and find a European Legless Lizard for adoption or rehoming. If you choose to get it, you're gonna need somewhere to house it. Personally, I would never keep a subadult or adult European Legless Lizard in anything smaller than a 4x2 by 2 feet enclosure. They're big lizards. They can grow as long as 134 centimeters or 4.4 feet. In your enclosure, you'll need to provide proper UVB. You'll also need several areas for your legless lizard to hide and deep enough substrate for them to fully bury themselves. Before we get any further, I want to emphasize that this video is not a care guide for European Legless Lizards. We're just talking about a brief overview of them as pets. Frankly, most of the care guides that you'll find online for them, except for the Reptiles care sheet, kinda suck. Really, my care plan that I've come up with just has come from reading scientific research papers and combining those with the anecdotal evidence that I've learned from talking with more experienced legless lizard keepers. If a care guide for this incredible species is something that you're interested in, let me know in the comments and I would definitely make a video about that. Now let's talk about the subject of feeding, because obviously that's something you're going to want to consider before bringing a new pet into your home. In the wild, these legless lizards eat primarily invertebrates. They also eat the occasional small mammal. Now, there's not a ton of studies that have shown this, but that's just what we know from the ones that we have seen. I think that diet is probably the most common way that we mess up European Legless Lizard care in captivity because there is such little information available about it. Based on the science that I have seen, I feed my European Legless Lizard every other day because that's helping her steadily gain weight without becoming overweight. And what I feed her is mainly live insects, and a couple times each month she gets a thawed frozen dog food that I can't remember the brand. Oh, it's Wysong Epigen, and she gets just a mix of different flavors. But again, that's just kind of more as a treat. Many keepers of European Legless Lizards feed almost exclusively canned or frozen dog food, and that does go against the science that we have regarding what they eat in the wild. Now let's briefly cover expenses. You're gonna need a 4x2x2, lots of substrate, lots of lighting, lots of hides, heating, all that fun stuff, so their startup costs and the cost of acquiring them is gonna be pretty expensive. That said, their recurring costs aren't too bad. I would say that they're similar, if not a little more, than that of a bearded dragon or another insectivorous reptile like that. Now, here's the really fun part. Handleability. Legless lizards with quite a bit of consistent work on your part can become pretty handleable. Normally Cypress she does a lot better with handling than she's doing right now because there's 2 different cameras in front of her and some lights that she's not used to, so I don't blame her. That said, it's not likely that your legless lizard will get to a point ever where they are like some reptiles that ask, if you will, to be let out of their enclosure because they want to be handled. I'm not sure why she's climbing behind me right now. And now she's climbing inside of my shirt. European Legless Lizards are definitely more of an animal that should be observed and given out of the enclosure time in a playpen or on the floor in a reptile-safe room rather than handled a lot. I tend to handle Cypress twice per week max, and she is let out of her enclosure to, basically her enclosure is on the floor. Every time I'm about to feed her, I open the door of her enclosure, let her run around my room for a little bit, and then I'll put her back in there, and she knows that it's feeding time then. Twice per week I will handle her before feeding time as well so that she associates it with something positive. Like, once we're done filming this, I'm gonna go feed her so that she knows that this was a good experience. Another thing that you'll notice when you're handling European Legless Lizards is that they roll around a lot. This is, since they don't have feet, this is their way of getting away from predators. So they roll around a lot. It's really interesting. I would just say that if you're looking for an animal that is handleable, that doesn't have legs, go with a snake and not a European Legless Lizard. You're gonna have a much more rewarding experience with them instead of something that doesn't really do great with handling all of the time. I'm gonna go put her back. Cypress has been the most rewarding animal that I've ever worked to tame. When she first came to me, she was pretty scared of all things human, and now I've put in a lot of hours of work with her to teach her that humans are good. She now knows that I'm the one who brings her food, so when I walk by the enclosure, she comes up to the door, and even occasionally she'll take an insect off of tongs, which is, like, I know that's something so simple that a lot of reptile keepers, that's just how they feed their animals. You know, like a bearded dragon obviously is gonna eat off of tongs, but when she first took food from tongs in my care, it was just such an exciting moment for me, because one of the very few notes that I did get when she was rehomed to me was that she was terrified of eating off of tongs and was terrified of people, and I've seen pictures of the enclosure, it wasn't great. And so just to know that she now trusts humans enough because of the work that I've put in to eat off of tongs, it just feels really rewarding to me. All in all, I can't recommend European Legless Lizards to the average beginner reptile keeper. They're hard to acquire, they're relatively expensive, and there are just so many unknowns about their care. They are such cool animals, and I think that in 5 years, if we know a lot more about their care, and if they are a lot more publicly available captive bred, they are gonna make incredible pets. That said, I would recommend that unless you can find one for adoption or rehoming, you do wait until they are publicly available captive bred. European Legless Lizards, despite all of the challenges, have been the most rewarding species that I have ever worked with. Will they be a rewarding species for you to work with though? That's a question that only you can answer. Let me know in the comments, what species do you want to see for the next species spotlight? And also, what do you think about European Legless Lizards? Do you have one? Do you dream of having one? Let me know your thoughts below. If you want to see more videos where I talk all about reptiles and amphibians, be sure to subscribe to my channel. Don't forget to turn on post notifications so that you won't miss my next upload. As always, I'd like to say a huge thank you to my Patreon supporters for making this video possible. If you want to support my content while also receiving awesome perks such as a sticker in the mail every month on some tiers, definitely head to patreon.com/hunterhauk. The link is also in the description of every video. If you also want some super cool reptile themed products that also support my channel, head to shop.hunterhauk.com. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much for watching today's species spotlights about European Legless Lizards. Once again, my name is Hunter Hauk, and I'll see you next time.